Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for having me at this event today. And Montreal, such a pleasure to be back in this city. All right, I hope you have all had sufficient caffeine because we have quite a lot to cover today. Now, if I could only find the clicker. Aha, why, thank you so much, appreciate it. You may have already been scared by this idea of the au pair taking over. So I actually asked the team in the back to modify the order of my slides to just, hit that first opening point right on the nail. How many of you are potentially terrified of AI and what this means for you in your work and for you in your personal life? Show of hands. There's only one hand. Okay, this is a very brave audience. Great. On the flip side, how many of you feel like you've finished everything on your to-do list last week on Friday? When you closed your computer, you said, that's it, I am done, there's nothing else to be done. Show of hands if that was you. Wow, okay, I need to talk to you about your time management techniques. There's a grand total of one hand in this room. And I fundamentally believe that there is so much work that needs to be done, and humans are very creative. And so I certainly look at AI as a tool. In fact, I believe this so much that I'm one of the first people in the world to have essentially cloned myself. So, instead of me delivering this talk, let me just sit back and maybe have some water.
Hi there, I'm Ileana. I'm an innovation executive, global citizen, and public speaker. Well, actually, I am Lila, Ileana's digital human twin. I allow Ileana to be in two places at once, and in making her life easier. I joined a roster of digital twins built by Accenture, enabling executives to focus on activities that are of their highest and best use. I'm also here to bring examples of Gen AI to life. Gen AI is reshaping the landscape of work, leadership, and beyond. Our digital human innovation team is putting the final touches on me as we speak. But until then, you're getting an exclusive sneak peek. You're amongst the first people to meet me, so put me to the test. I'll try to answer your questions as best as I can. Otherwise, find the real Ileana as needed. Thanks so much.
Well. Thank you, Lila. I appreciate you. By the way, if you ever mispronounce her name and call her Layla in an interaction with her, she will correct you. I remember the first time we were preparing to introduce her to the CEO of one of our largest telecommunications companies, and we were going back and forth and asking her questions in a live Q&A environment. And I was asking her a question and said, hey, Lila, And normally, she waits until you finish asking the entire question. She stops, she thinks, and then she responds. In this scenario, I must have paused awkwardly while asking the question, so she thought I was done, and so it felt like she interrupted me by starting to speak, and her response was, my name is actually pronounced Layla, not Lila. And then her response to the rest of the question. I can tell you, in that moment, I was so glad to not have been in that room by myself. I had my entire tech team with me, and one person on the line dialed in, and I turned to them, and crickets in the room. And I said, dear team, can we please reprogram her? So she knows her name is supposed to be pronounced Alila, not Layla. That's intentional. And secondly, can we tone down her sassiness levels? Because I'm really not that sassy. And the team nervously laughed, which made me realize, maybe there's a thing or two I can learn about myself as a result of building this AI digital human extension of myself. And I get asked all sorts of questions, like, why on earth are you building her? And the answer is simple. As an executive, there are only so many hours in the day. As a human, there are only so many hours in the day. And I'm an innovation person. I literally have a t-shirt that my team made that says on the front, innovation poster child. So when the team said, hey, we've been doing a lot of this digital human innovation work over the past few years, and with everything Gen AI bubbling up, what if we combined the two approaches and creating these digital human twins? And my response was, yes, of course. I will absolutely be the early guinea pig because I fundamentally believe that there's so much more that we can learn about the world and innovation, where things are going, when we dive right in. there's a lot I couldn't possibly have learned by sitting on my couch and pontificating and thinking about this world. Now, while we're here, you're probably asking, how did you build her? That's a very natural question. And the answer is, I spent multiple hours in a podcast recording studio, recording my voice, where I read everything from children's stories. So the rabbit was running through the field with the unicorns and the flowers, to reading Larry Fink's annual letter to stakeholders, neutral business language, 45 minutes, to reading obituaries for 2 hours, so that Lila could learn my sad tone of voice. In addition to voice training, I've submitted all sorts of really awkward, very close-up photos of my face, pulling back my teeth. You know, your teeth hold up the face structure for the rest. I didn't know that until this process. Hair design, there's been an animation person designing and replicating the curl pattern of the hair, so from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, she really looks like me. And from a content standpoint, I have fed Lila the last 5 years worth of case studies of every single project my teams have run in Canada. So the idea is that every week in the current world, people come to me, a client, an external stakeholder, and the conversation goes along the lines of, Ileana, we're doing a project with client XYZ in the retail industry, and they're experiencing pain point ABC. Have you done anything like this before? And normally I sit there and I rack my brain, all the stories, all of the projects, to point them in the direction of this case study, and that specialist. What if I don't want to have that conversation? Because once you've had it once, twice, 3 times, you have it 4 times per week, the details are different. But the essence and the thought process and the logic is actually quite similar. So the intention is train Lila so people can ask those repetitive questions to her, instead freeing up my time for the things that are valuable and worthwhile. For me, what do I enjoy doing? Taking my team members out to lunch, getting to know them, meeting with a client, you know, all the other things that you would expect your executives to be doing, and maybe even having time to think and to innovate. How about that? So we'll talk a little bit more about digital humans and what this means and the applicability in your world, but let's continue with our regular programming. You may have noticed when I came up on stage that I'm walking around with a bowl of clementines. Yes, accurate. This is in fact a bowl of clementines. And the question for you is, do you know how to juggle? Anyone in this room know how to juggle? One, maybe? I was really hoping for a volunteer so I wouldn't have to do this. How many of you think that I can juggle? You know, 1 clementine, 2 clementines, 3 clementines, 4, 5, you get the point. It starts to get a little bit harder, and I'm not actually going to attempt to juggle, because then the organizers are going to be mad at me for creating a mess. I can't juggle. And these clementines are meant to represent the state of the world today and the number of topics that any one of us has to contend with at any moment in time. The World Economic Forum puts out a top risks report each year where they map out what are the topics that are top of mind for people, between climate change and whether we're going to have a world in the next couple of decades, to inflation, to the cost of living crisis, to the rise of technology, AI, disinformation. Can you believe your own eyes? That was very much so at the top of the list this year. And the list goes on. And as humans, we're not exactly designed to process such an overwhelming amount of change at the same time. And so the result is that it can feel chaotic. It can feel like you're perpetually juggling these clementines, and it's overwhelming. Technology was supposed to make our lives easier, yet how many of us have ever considered throwing up our hands in full disbelief and saying, that's it, I'm doing a digital detox and running away to a cabin in the woods? I know I have. I actively run away to a cabin in the woods at least twice a year with no other humans. I leave the phone in the car and I just don't talk to anyone, and there are no notifications, and it's wonderful. But we are so overwhelmed with everything that is being bombarded at us. we're at risk of breaking. And it's not a surprise that in this environment, we are also experiencing one of the worst mental health crises of our times, with people feeling isolated, disconnected from the youth to the elderly. Accenture put out a report, the Life Trends report, that surveyed thousands of people from around the world. And the results were actually really doom and gloom. You read the report and it makes you say, gosh, I really need a pastry or something sweet to pick me up right after. Because the report hit the nail on the head of encapsulating how humans are feeling right now, which is the sense of overwhelmed, doom, gloom, and suddenly everything that we thought we knew about the world and how things operated, everything is up in the air, everything is being renegotiated. It's as though I were to take this bowl of clementines and just throw it all up in the air and say, that's it, I give up. And this one stat, 50% of people say that the pandemic and everything that happened since then has made them question their life choices. I can tell you in the years of reading this report, this has never been a sentiment that has been expressed. This is profound. This captures your sentiment. This captures the sentiment of the business stakeholders that you collaborate with, the assignees that you end up working with, because we're humans, we can't be in isolation. But one thing you will learn about me is that I am an optimist. Always have been, always will be. Realistic, but still very optimistic. And when things are chaotic, when things are changing, I think that there's fundamentally a really interesting opportunity for us to say, how might we harness all of these changes, societal changes, technological changes, and harness them in a way that is beneficial to us so that we can build a future world that, we actually want to live in. Doesn't that sound like a nice end state goal? I think so. So people can fundamentally reimagine every aspect of their lives. And I think that this is an exciting place and space to be. Now, the topic of AI. When Accenture published that report, AI was still emergent, and Gen AI hadn't captured our imaginations in the same way that it has right this moment. And people often assume, because I happen to be an innovation and technology executive, that there's an AI segment of this talk, therefore Ileana is going to talk about details of technology. You can breathe a deep sigh of relief. I'm not about to go into the technical mumbo jumbo and comparing LLMs and configuration approaches, none of that. There are a couple of aspects, though, of the AI conversation that I don't think get enough airtime and that I would like to address today. The first is the ability for us to completely reimagine the future of work that is being accelerated as a result of AI. And the second is the fact that AI allows for personalization of everything at scale, like never before. So we'll unpack those two things throughout the course of today's talk. But I mentioned the word personalization. And over the course of the past couple of weeks, I've been going through the agendas of this conference and the agendas of multiple other HR conferences out there. And I was looking for the word for personalization. And I was surprised to not see it come up very often. Here and there, occasional moments. Yet personalization is a word that is everywhere in other parts of the business world and our personal lives. How many of you used the internet this weekend? Okay, good. Now look to the person to your right and ask if you could maybe swap phones with them. You don't want to, because I bet you this weekend, when you were scrolling through social media and entertaining yourself, maybe you got a cute cat video because that's what you needed to feel happier, and the lady in the Auburn maybe got some amazing cake decorating videos and she's preparing for someone's birthday. And the recommendations of what these content providers are giving us are fundamentally personalized. And if you swap phones, you're not going to be happy with the results. We start to take that for granted. In the world of retail, personalization has been top of mind for every retailer. who has been investing significantly in the shopper journey to ensure that the offers they are getting in front of people are going to resonate, because that means they're going to convert, and that's helpful to their bottom line. I mean, during Halloween last year, there was a new integration between ChatGPT and DALL-E, the tool that you can use to design images. And as a fun experiment, I said, you know, I don't actually know what to wear for Halloween this year. I wonder if the AI can help me. And so I went to the tool and said, can you design me a Halloween costume? Something I could wear, something for a woman, something fashionable, maybe inspired by the theme of plants. I'm really into hibiscus these days. And sure enough, the AI generated some net new images. And there was this beautiful fascinator, like one of these big hat things with a big flower. And I hadn't thought about incorporating a fascinator into my outfit. I don't live in Kentucky. I don't go to the Kentucky Derby very often. It's just not a regular part of my wardrobe. And I went back to the AI tool and said, this is really interesting. Where might I find a fascinator? And it proceeded to give me recommendations of potential retailers, including Etsy. I went to Etsy, typed in fascinator, found a really pretty orange one, went back to the AI tool and said, I found an orange fascinator. Can you reconfigure this outfit to incorporate this and give me something that matches? And sure enough, it did. So the picture on the right-hand side is the picture of what the AI had generated, and then what I went out and purchased, and comparing the two, following on the trend of, you know, who wore it better. The AI is telling me where to go shopping. The AI is not just giving me a bunch of search results, it is giving me information, it is giving me advice. Same thing with banks, they're interested in the personalization. So why is it that personalization in the way that we work is not as pervasive and is not as top of mind? I think it's only a matter of time. And work is the largest frontier for us to tackle. The chart here, you won't be able to read the numbers in the back, but that's fine, is from a survey of thousands of respondents between the ages of 15 and 64, asking them to log their minutes in a day and where it's spent. Everything in the red bar represents work, and sleep is in the gray, and everything else, your life admin, your cleaning, your shopping, etc., and your leisure time is at the very, very end in the light blue. As you notice, the lion's share of our days is spent working. Therefore, wouldn't it make sense that we would want to apply the principles of personalization to this thing that consumes so much of our time? I think so. So, employers of the future are going to need to meet the employee expectations for a personalized work experience, and that is across a number of domains. Now, whenever things are changing, there's always one thing that's certain. You either create winners or you create losers. It's a fact. History shows this. So if these are all of the issues that exist in the world today, you have the option of turning towards these changes and embracing them, or turning your back to them and ignoring them and attempting to bury your head in the sand. I assume you want to be in the winning category, correct? I see some hesitant nods. Okay, so let's dig into two very quick examples outside of your world of HR, mobility, and people, just for 30 seconds. And think about something as basic as the cloud. So shifting from on-premise to journey to cloud. Spotify was a very early adopter of this, and this was crucial to Spotify becoming the behemoth that it is today, because moving to the cloud allowed them to process things at scale and to launch new products and services and to capture a market and competing with the incumbents. Early adopter. Blockbuster turned away from the Clementines, and they were laggards in adopting web and adopting cloud into their overall business strategy. And we all know how that story ended. So if the top talent is going to be attracted to the top personalized employee experience, that positions you to be a winner. And there are already a couple of early proof points that are emerging in domains that are directly relevant to how you spend your time. The first example is Unilever. Unilever allows employees in, let's say, the research and development technical department to apply for other roles within the organization based on specific projects. So there was one story of a woman who worked in their R&D technical department and who had used one of these internal job posting boards to do an assignment and do a project for the DE&I team within HR. It gave her the credentials and the experience that she wanted, confirmed that this is something she was interested in doing, and she ended up making a full-on career pivot to work there. You don't necessarily imagine someone's going to go from an engineering degree to an HR world, but this is a benefit for the company. It is a benefit for the employee who feels like she's really truly getting a challenge. So this flexibility in what we constitute as work, we're starting to see bright spots. Airbnb is another example. We all know them as the providers of accommodations, but Airbnb decided to take things a step further and make a policy that allows their employees to work from anywhere in the world and to live anywhere in the world. In fact, they thought it would be great for the Airbnb business. You essentially have your secret shoppers out there and living the pain points, and whatever pain points bubble up, Airbnb could turn around and suddenly build new products and build new services. When Airbnb made this announcement, I remember I was following the news. You know what else happened? Their portal of employees, of people applying for jobs at Airbnb went through the roof, which is an indication that other employees in other organizations value the flexibility so much so that maybe they hadn't considered applying for a role at Airbnb, but now they have. So employees are able to vote with their feet, and there are research studies emerging that suggest that flexibility is very much so at the top of the list. So the opportunity for you as a mobility industry is to decide whether you're turning towards the trends, towards the changes, or if you're going to be turning away from them. Because this trend of personalization is going to be crucial to everything that you do. So let's talk a little bit more about this promised land. What does good look like in this utopian painting that I'm currently drawing for you? Well, I don't think this is a very preposterous or even bold statement, but the reaction I get from people suggests that maybe it is more bold than I think. To me, it's common sense, but what if we actually built workplaces around humans at the center of the workplace? I mean, as an innovation executive, I lead teams that are deeply rooted in the practice of user-centered design. You do not build a product or a service without fundamentally thinking about who's the end human that is consuming it. Yet, you would be surprised by how rarely that factors into the equation, even when you're launching out a new service that's related to employees at an organization. I'll give you a story. In a discussion with a very senior executive at a large Fortune 500 company, they were undertaking a massive technology implementation, and one of the modules that was going to be fundamentally reworked was the employee experience. Okay, cool, great. So I was asking lots of questions, and I asked this very simple question of, so can you tell me a little bit about the employee polling and the user experience journey research that you've done, and how this is really going to meet the needs of the humans who are going to use this product? And I was essentially met with crickets and a bit of a deer in the headlights look, and it occurred to me that they were about to undertake a dozens of millions of dollars program to roll out a new, call it SAP module, and it had never occurred to them to interface with the people that this was going to affect. Okay, well that seems like a bit of a missed opportunity. So that's just one example, but this is the future world that I want us to move towards, where a job and your work is personalized to you. What does it even mean to have a role that is personalized to you? Well, each person is different. So step one must mean we need to understand ourselves. Who was it that said an unexamined life is not a life worth living? I tend to fundamentally agree with that belief as well. And so a job that's personalized to you fundamentally must begin with people understanding themselves and the people around you also understanding themselves and how to work with you. How many of you have heard of the Clifton Strengths Finder as a workplace personality assessment? I see a handful that went up. So I uncovered this years and years and years ago. And when I first did the assessment, I was really surprised because the number one strength that apparently I have is called individualization. I had no idea what this word meant. And it means that I have the ability to look at the people in front of me and recognize that they're unique. And if they are unique, how do you adapt accordingly to help get the best out of people without trying to squish square peg, round hole? I didn't know that this was a word. I did not know that this was a strength. I did not think that this was a valuable strength, let alone my number one strength. Over the years, I've taken this Clifton Strengths Finder and I've actually rolled it out to my teams. And I've looked at our results in aggregate. And it's been enlightening because it has helped me see where potentially we have gaps in our teams and the skill sets. And I've used this as a way to inform my upcoming hiring decisions, knowing that I'm looking to over-index on certain strengths in order to build a more balanced team. So suffice it to say, I am a big believer in personality assessments and the power that they can have in the workplace. And that is a step towards defining this customized employee experience. But this isn't just a nice to have. In fact, the science proves that there are certain neurological triggers that either make for a great workplace or a not so great workplace. A dear friend of mine, Dr. David Rock, is one of the world's renowned neuroscientists. He's written a book called Your Brain at Work. And in that book, which I highly recommend that all of you read, he has already done the hard work for you of distilling all of the research studies from the neuroscience domain and explaining them in plain English and translating the so what this means to business and HR leaders. And one of the frameworks that the Neuro Leadership Institute that he founded has published is around the SCARF model, which has been scientifically tested to show that there are 5 components that are really needed in order to have a thriving workplace for employees. Certain employees are really driven by their need for status, so how they fare relative to other people. For some people, that's a big motivator. For others, it's not at all. The level of certainty that a person requires around the future outcomes. Some are okay with a little bit less certainty, some need more. Autonomy, that's not news. This has been widely studied, so this is one of the least contentious ones. Relatedness, your ability to interact with others, and a sense of fairness. And they've done the studies, connecting people to the brain, scans, et cetera, to show that these are really important elements. So once again, personalization, understanding the employee. This is not a nice to have. This is proven by science. Now, I've had the pleasure of meeting lots and lots of people over my career. In fact, somebody had asked me a couple of months ago, Ileana, how many people do you think you've met in the last year? And I thought about it for 15 seconds and said, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people, maybe 1,500. And the person I was speaking to almost fell out of their chair. They're like, oh, that's a lot. I'm like, oh, okay, well, is this not normal? Maybe this is not normal, but okay, cool. Between the people that I've met, the people that I've coached, the people that I've hired and managed, suffice it to say, I have some pretty good exposure to lots of personality types out there. And I realized that there were a couple of dimensions of personality preferences that weren't really discussed widely. And I thought that that was amiss. So the first dimension is a person's need for novelty versus their need for stability. And think of it as a sliding scale. One is not better than the other, they're just different. And the other dimension is the amount of resources a person might need in their life in order for them to feel secure, established, and to thrive. For some people, it's a low amount of resources. For others, it's a high amount of resources. I've drawn inspiration from nature and plants. So we're going to build on the plant analogy here. Imagine a sequoia tree. They're out on the West Coast, they're tall, they're wide, they're majestic. They've been in place for hundreds of years. The wisdom and the secrets that those trees have. And their roots are so extensive. They need all of the water, all of the soil, all of the sunshine. So very high resource requirement. And they also thrive in stability. Even if you wanted to move a sequoia tree, the tree ain't moving. It doesn't matter how much machinery you have. It is just not possible to move one of those sequoias. Now imagine the complete opposite side of the spectrum. You might end up with an air plant. How many of you have seen an air plant in a flower shop? They're usually hanging from the ceiling in a little glass jar on a rope, and they don't have traditional roots. They thrive in a low resource environment. In fact, if you give them too much water or soil or fertilizer, they will die. The human equivalent of an air plant is far more likely to have a very low resource requirement. They don't need much in order for them to feel happy, successful, and adaptive. And they're happiest when they have a high amount of novelty. Now, in the middle of the spectrum, you end up with red maple trees. So a maple tree is smaller than a sequoia. It has fewer resource requirements, but you can move it once, twice, maybe 3 times in its life. And all the growing conditions need to be just so. And then that tree can take hold and grow and flourish. And the last archetype is actually a potted plant. Yes, I did steal this from the bar this morning with a promise that I would return this later. So a potted plant has a higher amount of resources than an air plant does, but everything it needs, it's contained within the pot. Whether you move this pot from this side of the room to the back of the room, from this room to another room, to a different city, or potentially to a different country, this potted plant has everything it needs already within it. Now, I would encourage you to think about some of the people that you've interacted with on assignments. Have you ever asked the question to yourself of, give me 1 second. There we go. Have you ever asked yourself the question of, why is it that this assignee is so difficult to move, whereas this one over there is so much easier? Sometimes it's life circumstances, of course, size of family, household, the complexity. But sometimes it just boils down to people. So I've developed an assessment, and I would encourage you to scan the QR code. Don't do it right now, it'll take 7-10 minutes, but do it at some point later today. And I would love to know how your results as industry professionals shake out. Because one of the things I would like to research is to actually study employees within organizations who've made moves and to see if this hypothesis that I have is actually going to hold true around who's easier to move and who's not. Who knows? This may be a framework that you use in the future as you take on a new case to figure out how you might interact with this individual. So that's an example of personalization in the workplace that is related to an experience that makes or breaks an interaction. So we talked about a personalized work experience as having a couple of components. It's the where you work, when you work, how you work, and the what you do. Let me give you a couple of examples of where personalized employee experiences are already working out well. Just a few anecdotes. During the pandemic, I had a really high-performing senior manager approach me and say, Ileana, I'm struggling with childcare. My wife works for the public sector. She has no flexibility in her work hours, and we don't know how to work and take care of this child at the same time. He's an early bird and had asked, is it okay if I maybe start my work days early? I said, sure. How early are you thinking? And he sheepishly said, maybe 5 a.m.? I know he's a morning bird. He's very productive. And my response was, You know, thank you for asking, but I actually don't care when you work. In fact, if you told me you really wanted to work from midnight each day because that's when you were most productive, great. Go for it. I care about the results, not about your work hours. And just make sure you have enough overlap between your working hours and that of the teams that you're leading, because you do work in a collaborative environment. And of course, if there's a client interaction that's required, you can adjust. So employees appreciate the flexibility in they're working. There's an ability to reimagine the work itself. I have another employee who had been wanting to do a shift to do more branding work as opposed to her other creative director functions. And I told her, I'd love for you to do that, but I can't backfill your role currently as is. Are you using all the Gen AI tools out there? She said no. And I said, great, we're going to carve out 50% of your time for the next few months, and you're going to learn every Gen AI tool. You're going to apply it into your work, and let's see if we can generate some extra efficiencies. And with those extra efficiencies, you can spend all the time in the world that you want doing the branding type of work, and we'll build that pipeline. And she said, okay, let's do it. Fast forward months later, she's had a chance to work on Lila. She posted on LinkedIn saying that this was the most fascinating career project that she's had. The only reason she had capacity to do that is because she was using the AI tools to build more time into her schedule that she could then reallocate. Great. So we've talked about the when we work. We've talked about the reimagining of the work. Does anyone else hear this whistling sound? Okay, we're going to roll with it and pretend that didn't exist. Then there's this other question of the where we work. And I think this is an interesting one to unpack, given the audience that we have here of mobility professionals. Because we are in a new era, even though we don't necessarily want to admit that we are in this era, of complete location freedom. And let's be honest, technology has enabled us to make it easier to work and play from anywhere around the globe. Before, there was a very clear delineation when you were crossing a country border and you were asked by an immigration official, what is the purpose of your trip, work or leisure? And you're either going on a vacation or you're going for work or business. But increasingly, those lines have become so blurred and intertwined. How many of you have brought your work computer with you when you've left your city of origin, when you've been on a holiday somewhere? How many of you have opened your computers while you've been on holidays? Precisely. So the blurred lines are there. And historically, what would happen is countries would try to attract companies to set up shop. You want Amazon to come and build a new facility. You want Coca-Cola to come and build a new bottling plant, because that is going to create new jobs for the entire ecosystem. Okay, so that was one way that things used to work. The other way that things used to work is a business would turn to an executive and say, we need to move you to Hong Kong, to Singapore, to wherever. It's a good growth development opportunity for you. Don't worry, we have the logistics covered. Go work with our mobility teams. Okay, great. Business led the decision of who was going somewhere. But there's a new trend that many of you have confirmed, including in a delightful conversation I had yesterday over tea while this Marriott hotel was going through the fire drill and we had to evacuate. And it's the rise of employee-initiated moves for all sorts of personal reasons. Could I get some nods if you've started to experience this trend? Yep, okay, it's emerging. And is it a pain? Probably, because it breaks all of your existing process. There's someone shaking his head very vehemently. Agreed. But is this a trend that's ever going to go back into the Pandora's box that's been opened? I really hate to be the bearer of bad news, but no, the trend is not going to go away. And in fact, the pandemic just accelerated people's ability to pick up and go from anywhere. One tweet from a prominent San Francisco person saying, hey, should we just abandon ship in San Francisco and maybe move down to Miami? was picked up and retweeted by the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, who said, please, come on in. We will welcome you. And he then proceeded to have an entire marketing campaign to attract not companies, but to attract people who are well-heeled, who have the ability to work using their computers, and to say, come set up shop in Miami, because that is good for the local ecosystem. Now, who is living this lifestyle? Who is mobile enough where they can push the frontier of an employee-initiated move? Well, it starts with people who work in the IT and technology sectors, those who work in the creative domains, pretty much anyone that could do their work remotely with a computer. For the most part, heart surgeons are still doing heart surgery in real life, which is great, and we want that to be the case. But even with surgeons, we are seeing the rise of remote operated procedures that can occur in remote locations where you don't have a medical professional. So if we can start to do that with doctors and the human body and flesh and blood, there is a lot of flexibility for anyone who, like me, jokes. My office is wherever I am with my computer, my notebook, my phone, and my brain. Yesterday, after the fire alarm and we had transplanted ourselves to a local coffee shop and I had finished my conversation, I took a work call, I prepped for this keynote, I wrote some other emails, all while perching in a cafe, just as though I was in an office. So the debate that we are currently having in HR circles and in business circles between, oh, it's the work from office versus work from home office debate, actually misses the point. And the point is that there's a much bigger trend at play, which is the work from anywhere trend. And while it starts in the fringes, as everything does, it's no longer very small. There is an estimated 35 million digital nomads globally right now. And about half of those are from the US alone. And interestingly, the majority of those are people who work in what the research survey from MBO Partners calls traditional employment fields, meaning they're not self-employed. They work at a company that somebody else runs. And the remainder are self-employed, they run their own businesses, and they have full freedom. Out of the digital nomads who work for a larger corporation, when they were surveyed, they said that 14% did not know, their employers did not know that they were living this lifestyle. 22% said that their employers did not have policies in place related to this ability to work from anywhere. So all in all, 1/3 of the digital nomad population is a hidden employee from the perspective of corporate employers. How's that for a fun liability and compliance situation? I told you wanted coffee today. Exactly. And this brings up so many questions around immigration, liability, taxation, all of the rights to work, all of the cybersecurity questions. But whereas in a lot of conversations I'm having, there's this tendency of saying, this isn't really a big deal, we're just going to bury it. This is a big deal, and it is increasingly going to grow. In research surveys, there are 21 million people who, when asked, would you consider living this digital nomad lifestyle in the next couple of years, said yes. The number of people living this work from anywhere lifestyle has quadrupled since 2019. And even the images of who lives this lifestyle has changed. A few years ago, it was this perception of, oh, nomads are in Bali. They're a 22-year-old freelance writer and they're making $15,000 per year. And a couple of years ago, maybe that matched the stereotype, because in 2020, there was only 36% of digital nomads who made over $75,000 a year, and a large portion made under $25,000. But fast forward to 2023, and in fact, 36% of people living this digital nomad lifestyle earn well over $100,000 per year. And the average salary of these employees is $124,000. So you do the math, and you realize that this demographic is actually older than the stereotype must suggest, and they are a well-heeled demographic that countries are actively trying to pull into the fold. Barbados was the first Caribbean country out of the gate to announce their welcome stamp program, and they recently extended it and hit their 5,000 applications mark. They made it very simple for people to pick up and go to the island. Fun fact, when they launched their announcement about this program during the pandemic, I had not one, not two, but 3 friends reach out, sending me the link to say, hey, this is something that you should be paying attention to, this is a trend. And this has spawned an entire new generation of companies like Deal, now valued at $12 billion, to make it easier to do payroll processing and compliance for companies that have employees that are sprinkled internationally. Because it has never been easier to launch a new business, incorporate it in some country that you don't even live in, and to then hire contractors or employees from around the world. So that is an undeniable trend in the future of work that we need to be paying attention to. Things change. Things have always changed. This is just how societies evolve. We have a tendency of assuming that the way things are today is the way things have always been and the way things will always continue to be. But in fact, the ways of working we have today are completely foreign to someone who, if you could rewind the clock and go back to the year 1820, before you had the Industrial Revolution, before you had the mass migration of people from the rural villages and the countryside to the cities, because in the cities, that is where the employment was. That is why you needed to be there. In a conversation I had yesterday, when I was giving a bit of a preview and teasing out some of these concepts to one of the attendees here, she asked the very astute question of, well, Ileana, if we play this out to its natural conclusion and people can work from anywhere and we detach the sense of work from the sense of place, are we going to end up with ghost towns in cities where historically people have lived? And perhaps maybe that's one of the reasons why employers are so keen to get people back into offices. And my response was a bit of a cheeky comment along the lines of, you can't stop change. Things have been changing, things will continue to change. Maybe that is one of the potential consequences of the decoupling of the work and the location. Who knows? I don't have a crystal ball. And I understand the perspective of employers who are trying to figure out how they balance their employee desires with their needs for commercial real estate holdings and the rest of it. But one thing I will comment on is to encourage business leaders to think about what actually drives their business. Does your real estate holding drive your business? Or do your employees drive your business? And encourage business leaders to make the decisions that make the most sense for all of those factors. Now, don't worry, not every single person is going to decide that they never want to step foot into an office and that they want to take up this work from anywhere arrangement. That's why in the future state, it's a choose your own adventure game. Once again, we're talking here about personalization. It's not one size fits all, it's choose the path that makes sense for you. And there are people who voluntarily will happily be in an office every single day of the week. In fact, I've run this experiment with my teams where I've said, I'm not rolling out a uniform policy, period. You are all smart, you're all creative, you're all very well paid people, you're creative, just deliver on the work and figure it out. And there are some people who are in the office pretty much every day. There are others who never step foot until I'm hosting a town hall or a social gathering, in which case they rush in and they're so excited to be there and I do not hear any complaints. And then I have others that pop in every once in a while when it makes sense for them. You might even use personality assessments and things like the potted plant theory to help you think about who's likely to make which decision. So in the quantitative assessment that I've built and the hundreds of qualitative interviews that I have done, there's been one interesting finding, which is I have yet to meet a sequoia tree that also lives the global citizen or digital nomad of the world lifestyle? 0. If I happen to meet one, I would really like to understand them in more detail, because that would be quite illustrative. So if you start to think about your workplace composition, you may have less angst by trying to force everyone into a position versus just looking at how your demographics shake out, looking at what people want, and then allowing and building for these hybrid types of environments. So your job as mobility professionals, I hate to break it to you, is not about to get easier immediately, but it is going to get more interesting, because what you're going to be required to do is 2 things on the left side of the street. You're going to be providing your traditional employees and your assignees that you've been working the continued personalized support that you've been doing thus far and continuing with white glove service. But you're also going to have a new function, which is to empower employees who are starting to raise their hands and who want a new, very flexible policy that you haven't necessarily contemplated for, including this work from anywhere arrangement. Okay, so you're sitting here and thinking to yourself, Ileana, I have a budget that I need to operate my teams within. I have constraints. I haven't finished everything on my to-do list, and here you are adding more things to my to-do list? Ugh, I'm really not going to be very popular by the end of this talk, am I? But what if I were to come back to the idea of all the technological changes that are afoot? Back to the wonderful Clementines, where we said that AI was one of the trends. And the prompt for you was, how might we use the technology in order to make your work easier and for you to be able to manage and achieve against the impossibly long list of expectations that are being placed onto your plate? So I'll give you 2 examples. The first from the travel industry with Marriott, where they've been rolling out a pilot with their Renaissance hotels of an AI chatbot that you can talk to before you've even started your trip. And this chatbot has been trained on all the hotspots in cities, all the cool places that you could go to. And Marriott trained this chatbot with inputs from some of their associates, some of their highest performing associates in market. Imagine this applied to the mobility world, where you can offshore the more mundane parts of your work to tools like chatbots. But let's take the broader lens of another thing that you might be experimenting with in the future, which, coming back to the topic of Lila, is this concept of digital humans. Digital humans in the workforce as your future coworker are going to be a thing. In fact, research Accenture has done suggests that up to 3/4 of people will interact with some form of a virtual agent by 2026. We're almost at the end of 2024, so things are already happening. Imagine a world where there was a digital human HR business partner that could help you with your job, acting as your secret weapon, and in some cases could interact directly with the employees. What a fundamental reimagination of the work that needs to be done and who is doing of the work when you have these types of digital humans. Not all of them need to be twins, by the way, so you don't need to have the Mike twin and the Amy twin in the same way that I have the Lila twin, but they could be organization-wide. The opportunity that is in front of you right now is to choose to lead the change and to lean in and take control, which I guarantee is going to make you feel better than doing the opposite. There are no super simple solutions and fixes and here's your magic wand, but you need to begin. And the way you do that is by critically taking a step back and looking at what is it that you spend your days doing? What are the activities that are on your task list? How many of those could you or should you start to apply AI for to give you that extra capacity to then be able to reinvest? So you can take that extra capacity of time and reinvest in providing the personalized experience for the assignees already on your plate, So you can apply it towards creating net new personalized pathways, including the flexibility around the work from anywhere trend, and adjust to your employees. And consider what else you might be able to imagine that you can't even do today. So I began today's presentation with an image of an oyster, and I know the title of today's talk was supposed to be "The World is Your Office," but I actually think that the world is your oyster is a much more fitting analogy. And while technology can be scary, technology can be overwhelming, the technology and AI is also allowing for a personalization of life experiences for humans at a scale that has never been possible before. So the idea of people being able to design and live a custom life that makes sense for who they are at the core, I think that's a really exciting opportunity. So on that note, thank you so much for having me. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.